All right, folks, buckle up because we're about to take a wild ride through a history lesson you definitely didn't get in school. Picture yourself in a cold, stone-walled courtroom in York, England. Circa 1370. The air's heavy, the crowd's whispering, and poor John Sanderson is standing there, sweating like he's facing a dragon. But it's not a dragon he's up against. It's a room full of judges, medical experts, and certified inspectors, all staring at him to decide one thing. Can he perform his marital duties? This isn't some medieval reality TV stunt. This is a fitness trial. A standard legal procedure where your most intimate capabilities were put on public display, dissected, and recorded for all to see. Welcome to the jaw-dropping, boundary-pushing world of medieval sexuality, where privacy was a myth and your bedroom was everybody's business. You think swiping left on a dating app is awkward? Trust me, that's nothing compared to what our ancestors went through. From 1100 to 1500 CE, this is WTF History, and today we're diving into the most shocking, invasive, and downright bizarre sexual practices of the Middle Ages that'll make you thank your lucky stars. For modern privacy, let's set the scene. When you think of the Middle Ages, maybe you imagine knights jousting, damsels locked in towers, or monks hunched over manuscripts in candlelit monasteries. Maybe you've heard the old tale that medieval folks were so repressed they only got intimate through a hole in a sheet, blushing at the mere thought of desire. Well, toss that image out the window, because the reality was far wilder. Medieval sexuality wasn't hidden away in dark corners. It was a public spectacle, woven into the very fabric of law, religion, and society. Your wedding night might have an audience of nobles. Your bishop could be profiting from a sprawling entertainment empire while preaching purity, and your doctor might prescribe intimate satisfaction like it's a cure for a cold. If you stepped out of line, you could end up paraded through town, dodging rotten vegetables. This wasn't just about personal desires. It was about economics, politics, and power. A failed marriage could tank family alliances. An unconsummated union might spark wars, and adultery was treated like a crime against the entire community. Intimacy wasn't just between you and your partner. It was a matter of public record, scrutinized by everyone from priests to neighbors. So, where do we start this insane journey? Let's kick things off with those fitness trials I mentioned. Because if you think modern divorce court is brutal, medieval Europe took humiliation to a whole new level. Imagine you're John Sanderson in that your courtroom, 1370. Your wife has accused you of being unable to fulfill your marital duties, and now you're facing a public trial to prove your physical capabilities. This wasn't some rare, freak incident. It was standard procedure across Europe. If your spouse claimed you couldn't perform, you'd be hauled into a specially designed courthouse room, complete with high windows, wooden benches for spectators, and a raised platform where you'd stand exposed while certified inspectors, usually midwives or medical practitioners, examined you. A court scribe would be there, quill scratching away, documenting every detail of your physical condition, your responsiveness, and your fitness for marriage. The process could drag on for hours, with judges, lawyers, and sometimes even your spouse's family watching your every move. Fail this test, and you didn't just lose face. You could lose your marriage, your dowry, and your entire social standing. Your whole life could unravel because of one bad day in court. These trials weren't just about proving a point. They were rooted in the medieval obsession with procreation. Marriage was an economic contract, and consummation was what made it legally binding. The church, which held massive sway over society, taught that procreation was the primary purpose of marriage. If you couldn't produce children, your marriage could be annulled under canon law, which drew from Roman legal traditions. A man's inability to perform wasn't just a personal failing. It was a breach of contract, a failure to uphold your legal and social duties. Here's the kicker. Women actually had legal rights to marital satisfaction, which might surprise you given how we often view the Middle Ages. If a husband couldn't deliver, his wife could drag him to court, claiming economic damages from a failed union. Court records from cities like London, Paris, and Florence show over 200 of these trials per decade, with a success rate of less than 30% for those accused. That means most men who faced these trials lost everything. Let's zoom in on a few real cases to get a sense of how brutal this was. In 1292, a man named Walter Deontay endured 3 separate examinations over a month, each more invasive than the last. His wife demanded proof of his capabilities, and the court obliged, putting him through a grueling process that left him humiliated and still unable to satisfy the judges. In 1450 Paris, Pierre de Franville managed to pass his trial, but only on his 3rd attempt, and only after downing dangerous herbal remedies that could have killed him. These weren't just tests of physical ability. They were psychological torture. Imagine trying to prove yourself while surrounded by strangers scribbling down your every move, knowing that failure meant social and economic ruin. Some men fainted from anxiety. Others wept openly, their humiliation preserved in court records for centuries to come. The examination process was methodical and horrifying. Inspectors used techniques straight out of medical texts, including stimulation methods, temperature variations, and even primitive devices that would be considered medical equipment today. The court recorder noted everything: your physical condition, your responses, even the time it took to complete the evaluation. Medical experts looked for signs of incapacity, often tying it to medieval theories about bodily humors, where imbalances were thought to cause dysfunction. If you failed, you weren't just labeled impotent. You might be deemed cursed or diseased, requiring spiritual or medical intervention. The pressure was so intense that some men, like Pierre, turned to risky remedies that could cause permanent damage or death. And who was watching? Not just court officials, but medical experts, notaries, and often family members with a financial stake in the outcome. Your in-laws might be sitting there, judging you, while scribes immortalized your worst moments. This whole setup makes modern relationship drama look like a walk in the park. Today, if you're having issues in the bedroom, you might talk to a therapist or a doctor in private. Back then, your intimate life was courtroom evidence, dissected in front of a crowd. The idea of medical privacy? Non-existent. Your body was public property, and your ability to perform was a matter of legal record. But here's where it gets even wilder. If you think having your capabilities examined in court was invasive, imagine your wedding night being a public performance, with a room full of nobles, watching to make sure you seal the deal. Let's step out of that grim courtroom and into a scene that's somehow even more surreal, a royal wedding night, where the bedroom is less a private sanctuary and more a stage for a high-stakes diplomatic show. Picture yourself as Margaret of Anjou, just 15 years old in 1445, marrying King Henry VI of England. You're nervous, it's your first time, and instead of a quiet moment with your new husband, you've got 23 people, nobles, clergy, even the Archbishop of Canterbury, crowded into the room, standing around your curtained bed. They're not just there for moral support. They're listening for sounds, watching for shadows, anything to confirm you've consummated the marriage. This wasn't optional. Without witness consummation, your marriage wasn't legally binding, and for royal couples, that could mean the difference between peace and war. Welcome to the medieval tradition of ceremonial verification, where your most intimate moment was a public spectacle, and failure could unravel kingdoms. This wasn't just a quirk of royalty. It was a widespread practice, especially among nobles, where marriages were political. Chess moves. A marriage alliance could secure trade routes, prevent wars, or ensure a dynasty's survival. But it wasn't valid until consummation was verified. The Church, which saw marriage as a sacrament, insisted that the two becoming one flesh required physical proof. Witnesses weren't just there for show. There were legal necessities to prevent disputes about legitimacy later on. A king needed to know his heir was his own, and noble families needed assurance their daughter's dowry was secure. The entire social structure hinged on legitimate heirs, so your wedding night became a community event, complete with rituals that sound like they belong in a dystopian novel. Let's walk through what this looked like. The night would kick off with a public undressing ceremony, where your relatives stripped you down while wedding guests sang crude songs and made jokes about your body. Your mother or aunts might comment on your readiness for childbearing, while your grooms' buddies offered him tips on technique, all in front of a cheering, drunken crowd. Then came the procession to the bedchamber, where guests threw things at you, supposedly for fertility, but really just to humiliate you further. You'd be forced to drink blessed wine laced with questionable herbs meant to enhance performance, and eat foods like oysters or honey cakes, all while enduring a barrage of lewd commentary. Once in the bedroom, the priest would bless the bed, sprinkling holy water on the sheets, and recite prayers for fertility and performance. The curtains might be drawn, but they were often thin enough to see shadows, and witnesses positioned themselves strategically, some near the bed to catch every sound, others by the door to make sure. No one bailed early. The next morning was no less humiliating. The sheets would be paraded through the castle or hung from windows for everyone to inspect, and midwives would examine the bride for physical signs of consummation, swearing legal oaths about what they found. These testimonies were recorded in official documents, some of which survive today, describing things like vigorous movement of the bed curtains or sounds indicating completion. If the couple failed to produce evidence, they might have to try again the next night with even more witnesses. Imagine the Prince Arthur in 1501. Their wedding night had 6 high-ranking nobles watching, including the Spanish ambassador, who was there to ensure the England-Spain alliance was sealed. Arthur's boast the next morning about being in Spain became legendary, but years later, when Henry VIII sought to annul the marriage, whether they actually consummated became a matter of international debate. Or consider Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette in 1770, whose wedding night was a disaster, with the Archbishop of Reims and French nobles watching as the teenage couple fumbled. Court records say it took 7 years for them to successfully consummate, each attempt a public ordeal. The psychological toll on young, inexperienced couples like 13-year-old Margaret Tudor, whose distress during her wedding night to the King of Scotland was noted by witnesses, is hard to fathom. These ceremonies weren't just about sex, they were about power. A failed consummation could nullify a marriage, unravel alliances, and spark succession crises. The virginity of a noble bride was a political asset, and its transfer had to be publicly verified to ensure legitimacy. French ceremonies often had the most witnesses. English ones focused on mourning sheet inspections, and Italian weddings sometimes had the entire wedding party in the room. Compared to today, where the most awkward part of a wedding might be a drunk uncle's toast, this is unthinkable. Privacy, as we know it, didn't exist. Your intimate life was a matter of state, and everyone had a stake in it. But if you think nobles had it rough, let's talk about the church, because the same bishops preaching moral purity were raking in profits from a business that makes modern hypocrisy look like child's play. Imagine the Bishop of Winchester sermonizing about chastity on Sunday, then sitting down on Monday to count the gold from his sprawling empire of adult entertainment establishments. Yes, you heard that right, the church wasn't just complicit in the sex trade, it was running the show. The Bishop of Winchester didn't just tolerate the sex trade, he owned it. In Southwark, just across the Thames from London, he controlled 18 establishments employing over 1,000 women, known as the Winchester Geese. These weren't shady back-alley operations. They had official signs, published price lists, and the bishop's coat of arms proudly displayed above the doors. The profits? They funded the construction and maintenance of Winchester Cathedral itself. Every prayer sung in that holy space, every stone in its walls was paid for by the sex industry. The hypocrisy is so blatant it's almost cartoonish, but this was business as usual in medieval Europe. These establishments, located in an area called the Liberty of the Clink under the bishop's direct jurisdiction, were purpose-built for maximum profit. Picture buildings with large street-facing windows where women would display themselves to attract customers. The Boar's Head could handle over 100 clients a night, while the Cardinal's Hat catered to wealthier patrons, charging premium rates for women certified, disease-free by the bishop's own physicians. This wasn't chaos. It was a sophisticated business model. The bishop's officials kept detailed records, preserved in church archives, showing weekly earnings of 20 to 40 pounds per establishment, hundreds of thousands in today's money. Women needed annual permits, paid weekly sin taxes to the church, and faced extra fees for working on holy days, though bans during Lent were often ignored with a bribe. The recruitment process was grim. Every year, the Goose Fair was held, supposedly a hiring event for domestic servants. But everyone knew its real purpose. Young women from the countryside, desperate for work, would arrive only to find the best-paying jobs were in the bishop's establishments. Church officials would assess them for attractiveness and health, funneling the prettiest into premium venues. The bishop's physicians conducted weekly inspections, stamping women as clean or banning them until they paid to bypass the rules. Protection services, another revenue stream, saw the bishop's guards patrolling the district, ensuring women's safety and customers' payments, for a fee, of course. Some women could even buy retirement funds, though few lived long enough to collect. This wasn't unique to Winchester. In Avignon, during the Avignon papacy, the Vatican itself ran a similar operation, with papal treasurers collecting taxes to fund armies. The building still stands, its papal coat of arms carved above the entrance. In Germany, the Archbishop of Mainz controlled a chain of establishments across 6 cities, while in Seville, the cathedral's sex trade operated via underground tunnels so priests could visit discreetly. These operations were open, advertised, and taxed, with the church taking 30 to 40% of every transaction. When reform councils, like the Council of Constance in 1414, tried to ban clerical ownership, they failed spectacularly, partly because bishops arrived with entourages of hundreds of sex workers, making it clear just how entrenched the system was. The church justified this with twisted logic. Citing Augustine, they called the sex trade a necessary evil, like sewers, to prevent worse sins like assault or adultery. Thomas Aquinas argued it protected public morality by regulating male desire. But let's be real. The real reason was money. Cathedrals were expensive. Bishops lived like kings, and wars needed funding. Sex trade taxes were a reliable gold mine, providing 20 to 30% of church income in major cities. The Bishop of Winchester's empire alone could have built a new church every year. A typical transaction cost 4 pence, with the woman keeping one, the house taking one, and 2 going straight to the church. Multiply that by thousands of transactions a week, and you see why reform never stood a chance. What's wilder is that this wasn't even scandalous at the time. Bishops were major landowners and tax collectors. Running sex establishments was just another revenue stream, like taxing mills or tolls. The same bishop who preached against lust on Sunday reviewed his brothel profits on Monday without batting an eye. By controlling the sex trade, the church also controlled society, deciding who could work, where, and for how much. They enforced dress codes to mark sex workers as separate from respectable women, turning desire into a taxable, regulated commodity. Compared to this, modern church scandals seem almost quaint. At least today's hypocrites try to hide their misdeeds. Medieval bishops slapped their coat of arms on the door and called it a day. But the church's contradictions didn't stop at profiting from sin. They took things even further by making intimacy a medical necessity, prescribing satisfaction like it was a cure for a cold. And that's where things get really strange, because medieval doctors didn't just treat physical ailments. They had some very specific ideas about what it took to make a baby. Let's dive into a part of medieval life that sounds almost progressive but is still utterly bizarre. Doctors prescribing intimate satisfaction as a medical necessity for conception. Yes, you heard that right. Your great-great-grandmother couldn't get pregnant, according to medieval medicine, unless she experienced peak satisfaction. This wasn't some fringe theory. It was taught in universities, written in textbooks, and taken as fact by physicians across Europe. It led to a world where doctors and midwives became intimate coaches, prescribing techniques and tools to ensure couples could conceive. Let's explore this wild corner of medieval medicine, where satisfaction was a prescription and the remedies were as strange as they were explicit. This all comes from the two-seed theory, an idea from the ancient Greek physician Galen, whose teachings dominated medieval medicine. Galen believed both men and women released a seed during intimacy and for conception. To occur, both had to reach peak satisfaction. If a woman didn't, no baby. This created a bizarre medical specialty where doctors and midwives taught couples how to achieve the necessary results. Medical texts like the Trotula, a compilation on women's health, were packed with detailed instructions on stimulation techniques, optimal positions, and herbal aids to enhance sensitivity. These weren't shy suggestions. They were clinical, precise, and startlingly frank for an era we often assume was prudish. Imagine a medieval physician advising a couple on their bedroom troubles. He might recommend gentle stimulation with sweet-smelling oils, like mint or pennyroyal, to warm the body. He'd suggest positions based on a woman's humoral, makeup, woman on top for cold, constitutions sideways for tilted anatomy, or specific angles for excessive moisture. These theories had no basis in actual anatomy, but they were treated as cutting-edge science. Midwives took it further, using illustrated manuscripts to show positions designed to maximize pleasure, or even cloth models to demonstrate manual techniques. In some cases, they'd coach couples in real-time, offering advice on rhythm, pressure, and positioning like some medieval version of a sex therapist. The tools were just as wild. Physicians prescribed warming devices. Think polished wood or ivory tools used as stimulation aids. Herbal concoctions with cinnamon, pepper, or mandrake were applied to increase blood flow, while wealthy women bought carved jade or pearl-studded accessories for exercises to aid conception. Some doctors even suggested musical accompaniment, believing certain rhythms could enhance arousal. One case study from a medical text describes a merchant's wife who couldn't conceive after 3 years. The doctor prescribed daily massages with heated oils, a diet of warming foods like ginger, and specific techniques for her husband. 2 months later, she was pregnant, and the success was credited to her satisfaction. The church's stance on this was a masterclass in contradiction. Pleasure for pleasure's sake was sinful, but pleasure for procreation was mandatory. Priests had to walk a tightrope, condemning women who enjoyed intimacy too much while scolding those who didn't enjoy it enough to conceive. Confessional manuals instructed priests to ask women if they responded appropriately to their husbands and whether they achieved the release needed for conception. Women who faked it to avoid unwanted intimacy were told they were thwarting God's plan. Meanwhile, nuns in convents, who often provided medical care, quietly shared satisfaction techniques disguised as fertility treatments, creating a shadow economy of intimate knowledge. This focus on female satisfaction wasn't just medical, it was economic. Noble families needed heirs to secure bloodlines. Merchants needed children for business continuity. And peasants needed labor for farms. Infertility was a disaster, so if satisfaction was deemed necessary, it became a priority. Religious objections be damned. Female practitioners like midwives played a huge role encoding their practical knowledge of female anatomy in medical language to make it acceptable. Teaching pleasure was sinful. Prescribing warming treatments was just good. Medicine, compared to later eras, like the Victorian period when female desire was pathologized as hysteria, medieval doctors were oddly progressive in acknowledging women's needs, even if their science was nonsense. But while satisfaction was prescribed for conception, preventing pregnancy was a whole different story, one that involved deadly risks and desperate measures that make modern birth control look like a gift from the heavens. If prescribing satisfaction sounds like medieval medicine had a progressive streak, hold that thought, because when it came to contraception, things got dark fast. Medieval women who wanted to prevent pregnancy weren't just risking their reputations. They were playing Russian roulette with their lives. The methods they used, often straight out of university medical texts, were a mix of ingenuity, desperation, and outright danger, involving toxic substances, animal waste, and rituals that could land you in a witch trial. Let's explore the harrowing world of medieval contraception, where every attempt to control fertility was a gamble with death, and the stakes were as high as they could get. Unlike today, where contraception is safe and legal, medieval women faced a brutal reality. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for young women, with the average mother surviving 8 to 12 pregnancies if she made it to menopause. Poor families couldn't afford another mouth to feed, and the church condemned contraception as a sin against God's will. Yet husbands had legal rights to intimate access, leaving women with little control over their bodies. The result? A desperate underground network of female knowledge, passed down by midwives and wise women, offering methods that range from mildly effective to outright lethal. The ingredient list for medieval contraception reads like a horror movie script. Women used pessaries, substances inserted into the body, made from exotic animal parts, heavy metals and toxic plants. Mercury potions, believed to cool the womb, could cause tremors, tooth loss, or organ failure. Lead-based solutions, called sweet salt for their taste, led to abdominal pain, nerve damage, and brain deterioration. Skeletal remains from medieval cemeteries show young women with lethal levels of lead, likely from contraceptive use. Copper sulfate, recommended by era medical texts, caused chemical burns and scarring. Herbal options like pennyroyal, rue, or Queen Anne's lace were slightly safer, but still deadly if misdosed. A single mistake could mean liver failure. Barrier methods were a bit less toxic, but still risky. Crocodile dung, used since ancient Egypt, had some contraceptive properties due to its alkaline nature, but in Europe, women substituted horse, cow, or pig waste, introducing dangerous bacteria. Honey mixed with acacia gum formed a sticky barrier that could work, but often caused infections if left in place too long. Sea sponges soaked in vinegar or lemon juice were more sophisticated, used by Mediterranean women as a physical and acidic barrier. But Northern Europeans resorted to moss, rags, or even bread, with infection as a constant threat. Wealthy women could afford animal membrane barriers. Think sheep intestines or fish bladders, tied with ribbons and soaked in milk, but these were condemned by the Church as armor against God's will, risking excommunication. Magical methods were just as common, reflecting the desperation of the time. Women wore amulets made from weasel organs or mule earwax, harvested under specific moon phases, believing their sterility would transfer through sympathetic magic. Some used dried menstrual blood, mixed into their husband's food, to reduce male potency. Others turned to gruesome rituals, like wearing the hands of unbaptized infants, sourced from a black market in corpses. Cat organs, associated with witchcraft, were ground into pessaries, and archaeological evidence from latrines near convents suggests their widespread use, despite the risk of sorcery accusations. This knowledge was shared through female networks, midwives, sex workers, and even nuns in convents who provided medical care and knew what desperate women might try. Men's refusal to practice withdrawal, also condemned by the church, forced women to take these risks alone. Court records show women beaten for suggesting it, leaving them to resort to poisons and magic. The prosecution of midwives as witches often targeted their contraceptive expertise, equating preventing life with ending it. Compared to modern birth control, which is safe and accessible, medieval contraception was a death-defying act of resilience, driven by the impossible choice between another dangerous pregnancy and a potentially fatal remedy. But if you think contraception was extreme, wait until you hear about the love potions that required robbing graves and harvesting body parts. A whole new level of desperation in the name of romance. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't about flowers, chocolates, or a carefully curated dating profile. It was about potions so grotesque they make modern romance look like a fairy tale. Medieval women desperate for love, or the economic security that came with it, turned to recipes straight out of horror stories, using corpse parts, bodily fluids, and rituals that could get you burned at the stake. Let's dive into the chilling world of medieval love potions, where romance meant grave robbing and risking execution for a shot at someone's heart, and the lengths women went to reveal the brutal realities of their world. In 1320, a woman named Beatrice d'Anisol stood trial in France for slipping her menstrual blood into her lover's wine. She wasn't some lone eccentric. She was following well-known recipes from grimoires, medieval spell books that circulated among women. These potions weren't metaphors. They required real, gruesome ingredients: bone marrow from unbaptized infants, organs from executed criminals, hair collected during intimacy, and even powdered human heart. Women bribed gravediggers, snuck into cemeteries, or paid executioners for body parts, all to create concoctions they believed would spark irresistible attraction. The preparation was as elaborate as the ingredients were horrifying. Bone marrow had to be extracted within 3 days of burial using heated needles, then dried and mixed with honey and wine. Menstrual blood was collected in special pots, sometimes during specific moon phases, and either dried into cakes or mixed fresh into food. Some recipes called for combining it with other bodily fluids for a mingled essence potion. Hair was secretly harvested during intimate moments, burned with incense, or woven into amulets. Organs from executed criminals, considered potent because of their violent deaths, were dried over low heat and ground with herbs like vervain or mandrake. These rituals often happened at midnight in churchyards or crossroads, with women reciting Latin incantations they barely understood, timed to the new or full moon for maximum effect. The stakes were sky high. The church saw love magic as witchcraft, punishable by excommunication or death, and secular courts treated failed potions as poisoning if the target got sick. Yet the practice was widespread. Court records from Montella, 1308 to 1325, detail multiple women using love potions, while a 1480 Venice case exposed a network selling standardized recipes. In London, dozens of cases appeared annually, with punishments ranging from penance for noble women to execution for the poor. Some towns, like Augsburg, forced convicted potion makers to drink their own brews. As punishment, why go to such extremes? For medieval women, marriage was often the only path to economic security. An unmarried woman past her prime faced poverty, and widows needed to remarry to survive. A good match could transform a family's fortunes, making love potions a high-risk investment. The placebo effect and power of suggestion sometimes made them seem effective. Men who knew they'd been targeted reported feeling unnaturally drawn to women, experiencing racing hearts or obsessive thoughts. Whether this was psychological or actual poisoning, the results could be real. These potions blended folk medicine and magic with ingredients like dove's blood or bone marrow doubling as medical remedies. This overlap let women source materials under the guise of healing. But the gender dynamics were stark. Women faced harsher scrutiny than male magicians, as their potions were seen as subverting male authority. The church's mixed stance, condemning magic but sometimes selling love charms, added to the chaos. Compared to modern dating, where the worst outcome is a bad swipe, medieval romance was a deadly game of deception and desperation, driven by the same human need for connection we all feel. But nothing compares to the public humiliation reserved for those who broke the rules of love. Adulterers faced a punishment so brutal it makes modern cancel culture look like a gentle nudge. If you think getting called out on social media is rough, let's talk about medieval adultery punishments, where public shaming wasn't just words, it was a physical, community-wide spectacle called la course in southern France. Caught cheating? You and your lover would be stripped naked, tied together with a rope around the man's waist, and forced to run through town while a jeering crowd pelted you with whips, rotten vegetables, and buckets of waste. This wasn't mob justice. It was an organized ritual that turned infidelity into a public purge. And it makes Twitter pile-ons look like a polite disagreement. Let's dive into the brutal world of medieval adultery punishments, where shame came with scars, and the community made sure you paid for your sins. Picture a small town in 1347 Carcassonne. Church bells ring at dawn, summoning everyone to the main square. The town crier announces that a merchant's wife and a young cleric have been caught in an affair, spilling all the juicy details of their discovery. The couple is dragged out, stripped by officials while the crowd gathers, armed with willow branches, spoiled produce, and chamber pots. A rope is tied around the man's waist, and the woman is forced to hold it like a leash, symbolizing her unnatural dominance through lust. Then the run begins, a 2 to 3 mile gauntlet through the busiest parts of town, past the church, through the market, around the well, and by the taverns. At designated punishment stations, the strongest locals deliver measured blows, while others hurl filth or insults. The whole event is a community affair, with merchants closing shops, children watching, and vendors selling snacks to spectators, all set to the rhythm of church. Bells signaling each stage of the ordeal. The records are grim. In Carcassonne, the merchant's wife survived her 3-mile run but fled town in disgrace. Her lover wasn't so lucky, the waist binding caused an infection that killed him within a week. In 1389 Toulouse, a knight caught with a baker's wife endured la course, his noble status offering no protection. The crowd, relishing the chance to. Humble and noble, was especially vicious, leaving him so injured he could never ride again, ending his career. Survival rates were low. 30 to 40% of men died from infections or injuries, and women, while less likely to die, faced severe whipping and crowd violence. Some couples chose suicide or exile over facing the run. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoring order. Adultery wasn't a private betrayal. It was a communal crime that threatened inheritance, business partnerships, and social stability. By making the couple run, the community physically purged the sin, with every blow reinforcing marriage norms. The rope symbolized the woman's seduction, reducing the man to an animal. But women faced harsher long-term consequences, often being expelled from town, while men might stay if they survived. The ritual also let the community vent unrelated grudges. Family members delivered the hardest hits, but business rivals or spurned suitors could join in, turning la course into a pressure valve for all tensions. Compared to other regions, southern France and parts of Italy loved rope-based punishments, possibly tied to Roman traditions of physical humiliation. England preferred stocks or pillories, while German towns used head shaving or tar. But la course was uniquely theatrical, blending violence, shame, and community bonding. Did it deter adultery? Court records suggest not. Infidelity rates stayed steady, but it served other purposes, reinforcing norms, uniting communities through shared violence, and reminding everyone that marriage was a public contract, not a private choice. All these practices, fitness trials, ceremonial verifications, bishop-run sex trades, prescribed satisfaction, deadly contraceptives, gruesome love potions, and brutal adultery punishments paint a picture of a world where intimacy was a public battlefield, shaped by law, religion, and society. Let's pull it all together and reflect on what this tells us about the past and our own time. After this wild journey through the medieval world, one thing is crystal clear. These folks weren't the repressed prudes we imagine, hiding their desires behind religious dogma. They made intimacy everyone's business in ways that would horrify us today. From fitness trials that turned your body into courtroom evidence to ceremonial verifications where nobles watched your wedding night. From bishops profiting off sex work to doctors prescribing satisfaction. From deadly contraceptives to corpse-filled love potions. And rope-leash adultery runs. Medieval sexuality was a public spectacle with stakes we can barely fathom. Let's reflect on what this tells us about the past, the present, and the timeless human. Impulses that connect us across centuries. The medieval obsession with public intimacy came from a simple truth. Sex wasn't just personal. It had economic, political, and religious consequences. A failed marriage could collapse family alliances, an unconsummated union could spark wars, and adultery was seen as a theft against the community. The church, with its doctrine of procreation as marriage's purpose, turned every intimate act into a matter of divine judgment. Your bedroom was a stage, and the audience included judges, priests, nobles, and neighbors, all with a stake in your performance. Privacy, as we know it, was a foreign concept. Your body could be legal evidence, your wedding night a diplomatic event, and your desires a taxable commodity. We've seen men like John Sanderson humiliated in court, their capabilities scrutinized by inspectors while scribes recorded every detail. We've watched young royals like Margaret of Anjou perform under the gaze of nobles, their sheets paraded as proof of consummation. We've exposed bishops like the one in Winchester, preaching purity while banking profits from sex work to build cathedrals. We've uncovered doctors prescribing satisfaction as a medical necessity, while women risk death with mercury potions or grave robbed for love magic. And we've witnessed adulterers tied by ropes running through jeering crowds in a ritual that left scars both physical and social. What's striking is how these practices reveal the medieval mindset. Intimacy wasn't a private choice. It was a public contract with rules, enforced by law, religion, and violence. The church's contradictions, condemning pleasure while profiting from it, show how deeply economics drove their actions. Women's desperation, whether for love, security, or control over their bodies, led to extreme measures like mercury potions or infant bone marrow, reflecting a world where survival often meant risking everything. Yet for all their brutality, these practices stem from universal human desires: the need for connection, the drive for reproduction, the fear of betrayal. Medieval people weren't so different from us. They just lived in a world without privacy, where every intimate act was scrutinized. This makes our modern world, with its emphasis on personal freedom and medical privacy, feel like a miracle. Today, your intimate life is your own, protected by laws and norms that medieval people couldn't dream of. Contraception is safe, love doesn't require grave robbing, and adultery might end a relationship, but won't get you whipped through town. Yet, there's a shadow of the medieval world in our digital age. Social media, dating apps, and online shaming create new forms of public scrutiny, where our intimate choices are tracked, shared, and judged. We're not so far from a world where intimacy is everyone's business, just without the ropes and courtrooms. So what's the most shocking thing you've learned on this wild ride? Is it the judges inspecting men's capabilities, the bishops running sex empires, or the rope-leash runs for adulterers? Drop a comment below and let us know your biggest WTF moment. Hit that like button if you're grateful your bedroom isn't a public stage, and subscribe to WTF History for more dives into the past that'll make you rethink everything. Because however messy your love life is, at least you're not dodging chamber pots or bribing gravediggers for a date. History, it really puts things in perspective.